47 seconds. That is how long the silence lasted. 47 seconds of nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint rustle of paper, and the sound of a man trying to remember how to breathe. When the camera finally cut to a wide shot of the hearing room, you could see it on every face. The staffers behind the dais had stopped typing. The reporters in the gallery had lowered their phones, and Kash Patel, the man who had walked into that room with his shoulders squared and his jaw set like granite, was staring at the table in front of him as though it contained the last 47 seconds of his career. Because it did. But to understand how a single question could break a man in front of the entire nation, you need to understand what happened in the 53 minutes before that silence. You need to understand the trap, because what Senator Warren did that morning was not an interrogation. It was an autopsy performed on a man who did not yet know he was dead. The hearing had been scheduled for weeks. On the surface, it was routine. An oversight committee asking questions about departmental budgets, operational priorities, and the allocation of classified resources. Kash Patel had prepared for this. His legal team had spent days running mock sessions, anticipating every angle, rehearsing every pivot. He had binders. He had talking points. He had that practiced look of calm authority that powerful men wear like armor when they sit before a microphone. And for the first 30 minutes, the armor held. Other members of the committee asked their questions. Some were sharp. Some were theatrical. Kash Patel handled them all with the same steady monotone, the same deliberate pauses that suggested depth without revealing anything. And then Senator Warren took the microphone. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward with that predatory energy you sometimes see in these hearings. She simply adjusted her glasses, opened a manila folder, and began to speak in a tone so calm it bordered on conversational. That was the first warning sign. Because in Washington, the most dangerous people are not the ones who shout. They are the ones who whisper. And Senator Warren whispered like a surgeon explaining exactly where she was about to cut. She started with a date. Not a dramatic one. She mentioned a Tuesday in March, nearly 2 years earlier, and asked Kash Patel if he recalled a meeting that took place at the Bureau headquarters on that date. Kash Patel blinked. You could see the calculation behind his eyes, the rapid sorting of memories and briefings and legal advice. He said he attended many meetings and could not recall the specifics of every one. Senator Warren nodded, as though she had expected precisely that answer. She reached into her folder and produced a single sheet of paper. It was a memo. Not a long one. Maybe a page and a half. But the way she held it, the way she let the silence stretch before she began to describe its contents, told you everything. This was the knife. And she was showing it to the room before she used it. The memo, she explained, had been drafted internally within the Bureau on that Tuesday in March. It was classified at a level that should have restricted its distribution to a handful of senior officials. The subject line referenced an ongoing counterintelligence investigation. The memo summarized key findings, named specific targets, and outlined recommended next steps. Except for one thing. Within 72 hours of that memo being circulated internally, the investigation it described was shut down. Not scaled back. Not deprioritized. Shut down. Every lead was dropped. Every surveillance request was withdrawn. Every analyst assigned to the case was reassigned. And the authorization for that shutdown, Senator Warren said, looking up from the paper for the first time, bore a single signature. She asked Kash Patel whose signature that was. The room went quiet. Not the restless quiet of bored spectators, but the airless quiet of people who suddenly realize they are watching something real. Kash Patel reached for his water glass. He took a sip that lasted longer than it needed to. He set the glass down with a precision that suggested his hands were not entirely steady. And then he said that operational decisions within the Bureau were made based on a variety of factors, and that he would need to review the specific document before commenting. Senator Warren did not react. She simply placed the memo flat on the desk and moved to the next page in her folder. What followed was a master class in prosecutorial architecture. She did not jump to conclusions. She did not make accusations. She built a structure, brick by brick, and she let the weight of it do the work. The next document was a phone log. Not Kash Patel's personal phone, she clarified, but the official line registered to his office. On the same Tuesday that Memo was drafted, the log showed a call lasting 14 minutes to an outside number. The number was registered to a consulting firm that had done contract work for a foreign government. She did not name the firm. She did not name the government. She simply stated the fact and let it sit there like a stone dropped into still water. Kash Patel shifted in his chair. He said that his office handled hundreds of calls per week and that contact with outside entities was a normal part of operations. Senator Warren agreed. And then she asked if it was also normal for a 14-minute call to an outside consulting firm to be followed, within 6 hours, by the abrupt termination of a counterintelligence investigation that the firm's client had reason to want terminated. Kash Patel's attorney leaned in and whispered something. Kash Patel said he could not discuss the specifics of any classified investigation in an open hearing. Senator Warren smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that does not reach the eyes. She said she understood completely. Then she produced a third document. This one was a wire transfer record. It showed a payment of $640,000 routed through an offshore account to a domestic entity. The transfer was dated 11 days after the investigation was shut down. The domestic entity was a legal trust. She asked Kash Patel if he was familiar with that trust. He said he was not. She asked if he would be surprised to learn that the trust was established 7 months before the transfer, that it listed no business activity, no employees, and no physical address, and that its sole beneficiary was a member of his immediate family. The hearing room did not gasp. What happened was worse. There was a slow, dawning stillness. The kind of stillness that falls over a crowd when they realize the ground beneath them is no longer solid. And Kash Patel, for the first time that morning, looked directly at Senator Warren. Not with defiance. Not with anger. With the wide, searching look of a man who has just realized the size of what is closing in around him. He asked for a moment to confer with his counsel. Senator Warren granted it. You could see his attorney's mouth moving rapidly, could see Kash Patel shaking his head in short, tight movements. When he returned to the microphone, he said that he had no knowledge of any financial arrangement involving the trust in question and that any suggestion of impropriety was unfounded. Senator Warren did not argue. She simply opened the next page. The fourth document was an email chain. The emails had been recovered from a server that was supposed to have been wiped during what Kash Patel's office had called a routine data migration 18 months earlier. Senator Warren explained that the committee's investigators had obtained a forensic recovery of the deleted files from a backup system that Kash Patel's team had apparently not known existed. She read the subject line aloud. It referenced the same counterintelligence investigation. The body of the email, sent from an account linked to Kash Patel's office, contained a single line. It said the matter needed to be resolved before the next quarterly review, and that all related documentation should be archived. The word archived, Senator Warren noted, was a term that within the Bureau's internal lexicon did not mean stored for future reference. It meant removed from active systems and placed beyond the reach of standard oversight. She asked Kash Patel if he had authored that email. He said he could not confirm or deny the authenticity of any document obtained through unofficial channels. Senator Warren asked if he was suggesting that the email was fabricated. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said that digital records could be manipulated, and that without a full chain of custody analysis, he could not speak to the provenance of any specific document. Senator Warren removed her glasses. She set them on the desk with a deliberate click. And then she said something that would define the rest of the hearing. She said that she found it remarkable that a man who had built his entire career on the integrity of evidence, who had stood before cameras and courts vouching for the reliability of digital forensics and classified intelligence, was now questioning the very foundations of the evidentiary process. She said the irony was not lost on her. Kash Patel did not respond. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His right hand was gripping the edge of the desk so hard that his fingertips had gone pale. Senator Warren was not finished. The fifth document was a travel itinerary. It showed that Kash Patel had made a personal trip abroad the weekend before the investigation was terminated. The trip was not on his official schedule. It was not logged through any government travel system. It was booked through a personal credit card and routed through a travel agency that had processed arrangements for several individuals who were themselves subjects of federal investigations. She asked Kash Patel to explain the purpose of that trip. He said it was a personal matter. She asked who he met with. He said he could not recall the details of a personal vacation taken nearly 2 years ago. Senator Warren opened another page. She had the hotel's guest registry. She read aloud the names of 3 other individuals who had checked into the same hotel on the same weekend. She did not say who they were. She did not have to. She asked Kash Patel if he had encountered any of those individuals during his stay. He said that staying at the same hotel as other people did not constitute a meeting. Senator Warren agreed. And then she asked why, if there was no meeting, the hotel's security footage showed Kash Patel entering a private conference room at 9:14 in the evening and not emerging until 11:41, and why 2 of the 3 individuals she had named entered the same room within minutes of his arrival. Kash Patel said nothing for 12 seconds. The camera caught a bead of sweat forming at his temple. It slid down the side of his face, and he did not wipe it away. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. Kash Patel said he would need to review any such footage before commenting. Senator Warren said she would be happy to arrange that. And then she reached the final page in her folder. This was the moment. The staffers on the dais had gone completely still. The committee chair had put his pen down and was watching with an expression that suggested even he did not know what was coming. The final document was a transcript. Not a deposition. It was a transcript of a recorded phone conversation. Senator Warren explained that the recording had been made as part of a legally authorized surveillance operation conducted by a different branch of the intelligence community, one that Kash Patel did not oversee and did not know was active at the time. The call was placed 3 days after the investigation was shut down. One of the voices belonged to a person associated with the offshore account. The other voice, Senator Warren said, and here she paused, here she let the silence build until it was a physical presence in the room, had been identified by 3 independent audio analysts as belonging to Kash Patel. She did not read the full transcript. But she read one exchange. The voice identified as Kash Patel was heard saying that the situation had been handled, and that there would be no further inquiries. The other voice asked for confirmation that the documentation had been taken care of. The voice identified as Kash Patel replied with a single word. Done. Senator Warren closed her folder. She placed her hands flat on the desk. She asked a question so simple it cut through every layer of legal insulation and plausible deniability. She asked him if he had ever used his position to obstruct, terminate, or otherwise interfere with an active federal investigation for the purpose of protecting individuals with whom he had a personal or financial relationship. And that is when the silence began. 47 seconds. The camera did not cut away. For 47 seconds, the man who had commanded one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance, and said absolutely nothing. His attorney whispered to him twice. He did not respond. At the 20-second mark, Kash Patel blinked. At the 31st second, he swallowed hard enough that the microphone picked it up. At the 38th second, his left hand moved from the desk to his lap. And at the 47th second, he leaned into the microphone and said 5 words that would be played on every news broadcast for weeks. He said he would decline to answer. Not that he could not answer. Not that the question was outside the scope. He declined. A word chosen with surgical precision by a man who knew that any other word would be worse. Senator Warren did not press further. She had built her case the way a mason builds a wall, one stone at a time, each one placed so that removing any single piece would bring the structure down. The phone log. The wire transfer. The deleted emails. The travel itinerary. The hotel footage. The recorded call. Each piece alone could be explained away. But together, laid out in sequence, connected by dates and dollar amounts that aligned with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident. They formed a pattern. And patterns are how you catch people who believe they are too smart to be caught. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes, but it was over. Everyone knew it. Kash Patel answered in monosyllables that no longer carried any weight. The man who had walked in radiating authority walked out looking like someone who had aged a decade in an hour. What happened in that room was not just a political spectacle. It was a window into the moment when power, the kind that operates in classified briefings and offshore accounts and private hotel rooms, is forced into the light. And what the light revealed was not a monster. It was something far more disturbing. It was a man who had convinced himself that the rules did not apply to him. A man who had spent so many years operating in the space between legality and authority that he had lost the ability to tell the difference. And perhaps that is the most unsettling thing about the entire affair. One senator with a manila folder and the patience to build a case that spoke for itself. One question, asked calmly, that turned 47 seconds of silence into the loudest thing that room had ever heard. The investigation that followed would take months. Subpoenas were issued. The trust became the subject of its own probe. The deleted files were entered into evidence. Legal analysts debated the implications on every network. But all of that came later. In the moment, there was only the silence. 47 seconds of a man sitting before his country with nothing left to say. And if you watch the footage closely, you will notice something most people missed. At the very end of those 47 seconds, just before Kash Patel leaned into the microphone, his eyes moved. Not to his attorney. Not to the committee. They moved to the gallery, to the back row, where the cameras were. He was not calculating his next move. He was looking at you. Because he knew the audience was no longer watching a hearing. They were watching a verdict. And they were the jury. That is the weight of what happened in that room. The systems we build to protect ourselves, the laws, the institutions, the oversight committees, only work when the people inside them believe they are being watched. And for years, Kash Patel had operated under the assumption that no one was watching. That the layers of classification and bureaucracy would keep him safe. He was wrong. And in the end, it was not a raid or an arrest that brought the truth to the surface. It was a woman with a folder, a microphone, and the willingness to sit in silence for 47 seconds while the most powerful man in the room tried to find a lie big enough to cover everything, and failed. The silence in that room lasted 47 seconds. But the silence that allowed everything before it, the silence of people who knew and said nothing, the silence of systems designed to look the other way, that silence lasted years. And it is still lasting, in rooms you will never see, in the quiet hum of institutions that have learned to mistake obedience for integrity. 47 seconds broke one man. But the silence that built him is still out there. And it will not break itself.